Hi, welcome to Translating Interview Speak, what your interviewer really wants to know. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 12. And in this chapter, you're going to learn about how to deal with bad interviewers and also how to deal with people that are really good interviewers. Hi, we're Barbara Limmer and Laura Brown, and we're the authors of Interview Speak, what your interviewer really wants to know, and we want to help you get your next job. So let's first talk about a little bit about different kinds of interviewers. So you really never know what kind of person you're going to be talking to. And two of the big differences between interviewers are, first of all, their experience level. There are some people that are very experienced, and there are some people that are very inexperienced. And the other big difference that you tend to see and hear is how much do they talk? You have some interviewers that are really quiet and some interviewers that are very talkative. So you'll find that you could be talking to a lot of different personality types, and you have to be ready for all sorts of different kinds of interviewers. So first, let's talk about the poker-faced interviewer. And what we mean by that is an interviewer that really doesn't show any emotion, doesn't smile, maybe not even look at you. So it's important for you to recognize that even if somebody's not smiling at you or responding to you, it's not necessarily a reflection on you. I mean, maybe that's the way the person normally is, or maybe they were taught to interview that way. They were taught, never let interviewees know if you like them or anything like that, because this is a better way to interview. Well, we don't agree with that, but sometimes that's what you're going to come up against. And recognize even if you can't really build rapport, you still want to do your best to answer the questions and you can still be hired. Again, it doesn't mean that they don't like you. It just may mean that this is the way that they approach interviewing. And what we hear a lot of times from people, even if they have sort of a stone-faced interviewer, that if they get the job later on, they might have a really good relationship with that person, even if it didn't feel like it started off well. Some other interviewers that you might have problems with are sort of lackadaisical or disinterested interviewers. Now, you might be talking to somebody who may appear like they don't even want to be here, that maybe they're checking their watch or they're on their computer or they're checking their phone, or they might even take calls during the interview. Now, first of all, don't take it personally because the fact is that maybe they are really super busy and maybe they were, asked by their boss to interview you 5 minutes ago and they didn't expect it. Or maybe they've already decided that they're going to go ahead with you or they're going to go ahead with somebody else. And so they don't really feel that they need to be here. But the point is, don't let it throw you off even if they're looking down at their papers as they sort of look up at you a little bit and answer and ask questions. What you want to do is still try to build rapport and accept that, again, just like the other interviewers, you may not be able to. But make sure that you ask questions at the end of the interview and ask them things like, well, and how is that issue handled here? Because again, you're trying to connect with them and get them to give you some answers. You won't be able to do it all the time, but this is a way that you can think about dealing with a lackadaisical or disinterested interviewer. Now let's hear about some others.
So we've all had experience with the talkative interviewer, I'm guessing. People that barely even allow you to get a word in edgewise. So some interviewers just like to hear themselves talk. And if they don't ask you very many questions, that's going to be very difficult for you to share your stories and your successes. So the best way to deal with that kind of interviewer is to demonstrate your active listening skills, show genuine interest in what they have to say, and inject some brief comments or questions as they're talking that will then allow you to provide examples from your past experience. So it might sound something like, oh, that reminds me of a time. Or, that's really interesting to hear you say that. I had a similar situation happen to me. And two things to note here. First of all, interviewers often walk away loving candidates who don't get to say much just because they felt really comfortable and they felt like the candidate was a really good listener. The other thing about this is it makes the interview feel more like a back and forth dialogue rather than a stilted Q&A. And if it's a natural back and forth dialogue, that goes a long way to helping you build rapport. So it's okay if you end up having a talkative interviewer. You just have to kind of approach it differently. Now, there's the other side of the equation. What about the interviewer who asks very few questions? So they might just open with, tell me about yourself, or a similar kind of question, walk me through your background. And that might be it. They might not have prepared any other questions, either because they ran out of time, or maybe that's just what they do. They want it to be a natural conversation. Again, they may be talking to you only to give their approval to the hiring manager's preferred candidate. So that might be a good message for you. This might be your boss's boss, as we talked about in our last video. It might be a peer. Maybe that peer hasn't had a whole lot of experience interviewing. So the only thing they prepared was the opening question. It could also be a peer of your boss who was asked to sort of rubber stamp this hire. So remember your strongest examples that showcase your successes relevant to this job. And you could actually ask questions that serve sort of as transitions to those stories. So if they don't really ask you many questions and then just say, well, what questions do you have for me? One of your questions might be something like, what type of problems have you had related to X? Knowing that when you handled X, it was a tremendous success. So that's what we mean when we say ask questions that can serve as transitions to your success stories. Then we've got the inexperienced interviewer, and this is very often a junior talent acquisition type, or it might be a peer. It might be someone who is following a script or a prescribed set of questions, and that might be obvious to you. And I've had some clients that are kind of annoyed by that, but you know what? It's just part of the process. And they, like the poker faced interviewer, may give no visual cues on how you're doing. They give you the impression that they're just waiting for you to finish before asking their next question. But what should you do? You should still try to build rapport at the beginning and throughout the interview. And just recognize we all had to start somewhere. And if they lack a whole lot of experience, that's okay. They're still involved and will be asked for their feedback. So answer their questions as best you can and do whatever possible to try and build rapport, even though it might be difficult to do so. And again, at the end of your answers, you might ask sort of a temperature check type of question to get a response out of them. So after you complete your answer, you could say something like, does that make sense? Or how would that work here? And again, that makes it feel a little bit more like a two-way dialogue instead of a scripted Q&A. Now we've got the highly experienced interviewer, and these are people who may work at a recruiting firm or in HR talent acquisition. In other words, they interview for a living. They've got a great deal of experience doing so, and they just might have very thorough and detailed questions for you. They also may continually probe you, interrupt you, and or ask follow-up questions. So you think you're finished answering their question and they throw another one at you right away and they dig deeper, deeper, deeper to get you to provide more details. The best way to handle them is to pause, take a breath, and think prior to starting your answer. Don't allow them to throw you off just because they're firing questions at you one after the other. If you can slow down the process and not feel rushed, allowing yourself to think, chances are you'll do much better in answering their questions.
Now, what we do in the book is we have a number of examples in different chapters. And in this chapter, we actually have an example of a full interview because we want you to see how a full interview with an experienced interviewer might look. And throughout the interview, what we do is we stop, we pause it, and then we give some comments about what went well, what could have been done better. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to give you just a bit of that interview transcript. And what you're going to hear is Valerie, who's an HR manager, is conducting the first round interview for a social media specialist. Barbara is going to be Valerie. I am going to be the interviewee, Maya. So let's get started. After her initial opening, Valerie asks,
Describe your experience managing brand reputation through social media and review sites.
in my current role, I developed a strategy that included monitoring social media channels and review sites for mentions of our brand.
Which channels?
Well, it was Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Anyway, I was able to provide insights for our marketing customer service teams, allowing us to proactively address potential reputational risks. And we use Hootsuite, but I'm familiar with Sprout Social, so I could quickly learn it.
Wait a minute. Tell me about some of the insights you provided to marketing and customer service.
Well, when we launched a new version, we got specific feedback on customer preferences and pain points. The report showed a trend that response time to customers needed to be addressed. And one of my key responsibilities was to track customer feedback and respond promptly. So I started a 24-hour response rule for negative comments, which helped us to address concerns quickly.
How did you implement that rule, and were you the only one responding?
Well, three of us worked on responses. Now, I was the one that suggested the 24-hour response rule, and they agreed.
How did you get them to agree?
Well, there had been an unofficial 48-hour rule in place, but waiting that long meant that there were already negative comments by the time we addressed it. We were in a meeting discussing these posts, and it became obvious that we needed to respond sooner. So when I said to try 24 hours, they agreed.
Okay, so we're going to pause that part of the interview now and share some insights about what just happened. So, because Maya included several generalities in her answer, Valerie interrupted several times to probe further. So, let's go through those. When Maya talked about monitoring social media channels, Valerie asked for specifics. When Maya mentioned providing insights to marketing and customer service, Valerie probed for more details on those insights. When Maya talked about starting a 24-hour response rule, Valerie wanted more info on how she made that happen. And when Maya said her colleagues agreed, Valerie interrupted and wanted to know how she got them to agree. So, with regard to Valerie's interruptions, is it possible that she did them specifically to throw off Maya's timing or focus? Yeah, it's possible, and we don't know that. But the bottom line is, if you're dealing with an experienced interviewer, they just might interrupt you, and you've got to be ready. And in this case, by leaving off key specifics, one of two things could happen with an experienced interviewer. Well, either you'll have to deal with them continuing to push you for more details, or even worse, they won't bother to interrupt and will just continue on with their questions. And then you leave the interview thinking that you did well and will be absolutely surprised when you don't get the job offer or you don't even get invited back. So, again, interruptions really can be a gift because they help you to get back on track. Think of them as gifts. Because they're basically telling you exactly what they want more information on.
At the end of all of our chapters, we add something called Think About. And it's basically giving you a couple of things to really consider and go through as a summary. And so some of the things we want you to think about in this chapter are what kinds of interviewers have you talked with in the past? And then think about which kind of interviewers do you find it difficult to interact with? And then think about why. And what kind of interviewers have you interacted with that went well? And think about those difficult interviewers. What could you do to make it easier for you? That's chapter 12. Next up is chapter 13, the final chapter in the book, and it's all about next steps. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Clueless Clark. And we're going to take a look at Clueless Clark throughout each chapter. He's actually going to go back through each chapter of the book and think about what did he learn from this information so you can learn from it too. And then we're going to talk about what's next for you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please like and share. And remember, you can get a 40% discount off at Manning.com. Thanks so much for joining us today.